thank you for being you. Thank you for all that you do. And I was thinking about moms, kind of versus dads, but not to pit them against each other. But there is a difference between mom love and dad love. At least in our household, there is, right? Man, my wife brings such just another level, oftentimes, of intentionality to our family. For example, when it comes to birthdays, listen, if it was just up to me, birthdays would be like, are we going to order pizza? Great. That would be it. Like, we would order pizza. Because if Beth was not around, we would order pizza 8 times a week, I think, just because that's how I would do things. But for my wife, she's like, no, it's their birthday. We got to make it special. And she just goes planning mode, and she makes sure there's a banner up, in the morning for them to see happy birthday. She does all these Post-it things. She, gifts, and, where are we going to do lunch or supper, and take them food to their school. I mean, she just brings a whole nother level of intentionality and planning and purpose. And I just really appreciate that about her. And I know a lot of moms are like that at our church. So thank you for being you. Now, whether you are a mom or a dad or or just a person, you know that parenting is a challenge. Can I get an amen on that one? Right? I mean, parenting is hard. And what we know about parenting is that our kids are going to have to someday go into the real world. Now, unfortunately, there's part of us there's part of us that really want our kids to stay that sweet, kind of innocent 5-year-old who always laughs and giggles. And we were just looking at videos the other day of when our kids were like really young, and like that's so nice, right? But on the other hand, we don't want to have to keep feeding them or have to keep wiping their bottoms or all those kind of things we have to do with little kids. Eventually, they're gonna have to grow up and go out into the real world, and so we have this tension that we kind of feel. But as you guys know, growing older happens naturally. But here's also something that, especially our moms, growing up happens intentionally, right? Growing older, that's just going to happen. But in order for them to grow up, it takes intentionality. Why? Because maturity requires intentionality. Maturity requires that extra level of focus, of planning. And if they don't mature, if they don't actually grow up, what's going to happen to our 30-year-olds? They're never going to leave the house. And we want them to what? Leave the house. Right? Now, if you're staying with your parents, that's great and all good, but that's not the ultimate goal, right? I wouldn't say anybody was like, that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is for you all to grow up and to mature. But maturity, growing up, takes intentionality. Now, with all that in mind, I just want to pause and say, if you are new with us, thank you for coming. If you are here because your mom invited you or your mom guilted you into it, blink twice for me right now so we know who that is. But we also are just happy that you are here. And if you are new, we are in the series we are calling How Jesus Changed the World, because there's no argument that he did change the world, which is really remarkable if you think about who Jesus was and where he lived and what he had at his disposal. He, in fact, changed the world. But we asked the question, how did Jesus change the world? And we said that the first week, Jesus changed the world one person at a time. And really, if we want to get really specific about it, Jesus changed the world one disciple at a time. We're going to talk about what that means in a moment. But Jesus changed the world through what we call disciple making. Disciple making, these relationships that he invited men and women into as disciples, and that really changed their world, and eventually it changed our world. But if you're new with us, and if you don't know what a disciple is, let me just explain real quickly what that is. A disciple is someone who wants to be with Jesus in order to become like Jesus. So if you think about it, these men and women agreed to really, this maybe a better word in our culture today is to apprentice. They apprenticed under Jesus. They were wanting to be with Jesus in order to think like Jesus, to act like Jesus, to teach like Jesus, to pray like Jesus, to see the world the way Jesus saw the world. That's what they were doing. They wanted to be just like the rabbi or the teacher, in this case, Jesus. Now, again, if you're new to the church world and you've been kind of with us at the beginning of the series, you're like, man, why do we keep talking about disciple making? Well, here's really, I think, the ultimate reason. I really believe that if you think about all the problems in this world, the biggest problems, like immigration or social injustices or environmentalism, all those kind of things that we would say, there's a problem going on here. I really believe that when, at the end of the day, if people would actually just live and love more like Jesus, most of those problems, if not all those problems, would actually go away. I really believe this is a discipleship issue at the end of the day, that if people just lived like Jesus and loved like Jesus, a lot of these issues would not actually be issues. And so, how did Jesus do disciple making that inevitably changed the world? Well, that's the tool that we started with the first week. This is called the PRISM tool that we kind of came up with. It's an acronym to kind of help separate the different aspects to what Jesus did with his disciples. So just like a prism takes the light, the white light, and breaks it apart into this beautiful rainbow of colors, red, yellow, blue, and all those things, that is the same way this prism tool kind of breaks up the different aspects into these colors that we're looking at of what Jesus did with his disciples. And you can't take one away, just like you can't subtract red from the rainbow. It wouldn't look right. It wouldn't function right. And so we are looking at all these aspects and just seeing each one of them for just the beauty for what they are. So the first week we said one of the aspects to, and really a really important aspect to Jesus' style disciple making, was that Jesus was so personal with his disciples, that he was so open, that he invited them in. He was so available and vulnerable, and he just created space for him to have these relationships, these incredibly close relationships with actually just a few men in his life, just a few, these handful of men and women that he spent time with personally. And then we said Jesus was also focused on reproducing himself. And it was Jesus' style disciple making needs to be reproducible. That he wasn't focused on generating ministry, as Pastor Donnie talked about, but he was focused on generational ministry. That his goal was to reach the nations. And how do you reach the nations? It's through generations, one generation at a time. And so Jesus' style disciple making needs to be focused on a way that we can reproduce ourselves. And then this week we're going to get into this word right here. I is intentional. Intentional. And the reason intentional is so important that we need to talk about is because we all have a tendency to drift. Say drift with me. Drift. And the reason I ask you to say drift, because some of you have already drifted. Right? Some of you have already drifted this morning, and I won't call you out, but I can tell. Some of you are already out. Like you're out. You're thinking about lunch. You're thinking about the afternoon. You're thinking about something else other than this. We tend to drift. We tend to lose focus. We tend to lose energy. We get complacent. We just kind of drift. And we don't always intend to, but that's just our natural tendency. And so intentionality helps us to stay clear from this idea of drifting. In fact, intentionality helps us to redirect or bring direction back into our lives. There was a book that I read several years ago. It's called The Fellowship of Difference. It's by Scott McKnight, if anybody's interested in reading it. But in it, he talks about the three aspects of love. He says love, if you really want to know what love is, love does three things. There's a withness to love. That means I'm present. I want to be with you. Mother's Day, like you can say, I love you, Mom, but Mom's like, no, you need to be what? With me. Like that's how you show your love. There's a withness to love. But there's also a forness to love. That means there's an advocacy to love. I am for you. I will fight for you. I am in your corner. No matter what happens, I am there. I am there for you. But, and this is what stuck out to me, and this is what I'll never forget when I read this, I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. He says there's also an unto-ness to love. There's an unto-ness to love. In other words, there's a direction to love. That love says, I love you where you're at, but I love you too much to let you stay where you're at, right? And that's parenting. Isn't that parenting 101? Like, I love you where you are. Moms will say that. But if you're still doing the same things you're doing now, like 20 years from now, that's a problem. There's a direction to love. Here's what he says. He says this. He says, if with is the principle of presence and for is the principle of advocacy, unto-ness is this principle of direction. Love has a direction to it. Love has a vision to it. Love has, hey, I have an agenda. I'm not afraid to say it. Like, I want the best for you. Love is willing the good of another. Like I have good things in mind for you. I want that for you. And so I'm going to encourage you that way. I'm going to direct you that way. Here's how I say it. You can't fully love someone without also loving them somewhere, right? Because that's not good love. That's not good parenting. That's just not loving to say, you know what? If you're going to be the same as you are 20 years from now, that's, no, I want something better for you. I want you to grow. I want you to mature. So love has a direction to it, but also here's why intentionality is so important as well. Because intentionality, there's like two sides to any sort of relationship. There is the relational side to a relationship. But on the flip side of the relational side there is an intentional side. If we only stay on the relational side, as we already talked about, you're like a buddy on a couch. And a buddy on a couch can talk sports, can play video games, can, just whatever, but there's no intentionality. The relationship's not going to go anywhere. But if you're only intentional, you're like maybe like a school teacher or professor. You're handing out information, you're giving direction, but there is no relationship. I don't know your name, I don't know anything about you, and that's not really great either. What a relationship ultimately needs is both relational and intentional sides coming together. And so when you have relational and intentional coming together, that's where there's depth. If you're dating and you're only here, guys, listen up. If you're only here, eventually your lady friend's going to ask you what? Where's this thing going, right? Where's the intentionality behind it, right? It needs both, and that's where you get depth of a relationship. So intentionality is really important to that. So what does intentionality look like, and what does it mean for us as disciples of Jesus? That's what I want to go look at this morning. So if you have your Bibles, we're just going to look at a couple verses this morning. Luke chapter 6, Jesus gives us this really very short but sweet parable and a little bit of like just teaching to go with it that I think is really profound if you stop and think about it for a moment. And that's what we're going to do. So here's what Jesus says, Luke chapter 6, verse 39. He also told them this parable. Can the blind lead the blind? And everybody answered, no, right? Because what happens if the blind end up leading the blind? They both do what? They both fall. They both fall. In fact, this is so fascinating. This past weekend, we were at their men's retreat at the Deer Creek State Lodge, and they have other conferences there, not just ours, because it's a big place. And we noticed there was a lot of blind people there. And turns out there was a conference, and the conference really wasn't for the blind folks. Actually, I talked with somebody to find this out. It wasn't for the blind people. It was for the helpers of the blind people. But because the helpers are oftentimes the spouses or caregivers, the blind people were there, but you didn't see blind people leading the blind. You had the helpers helping them, guide them where they needed to go all weekend long. It was just really interesting and fascinating and just sweet people. And that's the point. It's like you can't have the blind lead the blind. You need some help with that. And just like with disciple making, if two people who don't know where they're going try to get together, they still won't know where they're going. Then he says this. This is so powerful next. The student, he said, is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. And I think Jesus gives us so much insight into what it means to be a disciple and what this whole disciple-making relationship ought to look like based on, I think, just one word here. Let's focus in on this word trained. And I want you to know something this morning. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, becoming more like Jesus, that's what we signed up for. Becoming more like Jesus, okay, is not about trying. It's about training. Okay? It's not about trying. It's about training. In fact, Dallas Willard said it this way. As disciples, we are not trying to be different people. We are training to be different people. And I think this is one of the biggest kind of maybe misunderstandings and frustrations when it comes to following Jesus. We're all trying, but few of us are actually training, right? We're often told, try harder, just try harder, right? Like, don't worry. Some of you hear a sermon on don't worry, and so you go home and you try not to worry. How long does that last? Until like the first text message or the first news headline or something. It's like, well, there we go. I tried. It's not about trying harder. It's about training, right? In fact, nowhere in the Bible does it say if you want to become more like Jesus, just try. Try, and try again. No, it's about training. You see this word over and over again in the New Testament. It's about training. And why is it about training, not trying? Well, the difference between the two is the degree of intentionality. And this is so important, right? For example, um, let's say you decide to run a marathon. How many runners do we have in here? Runners? Great. You are not my people, okay? Highly respect you. Wish I could be you, but I hate running. How many hate running? Just curious. All right, my people, right? Now, imagine if you're trying to run a marathon and you wake up the morning of the marathon and say, I'm going to try to run a marathon today. So you get your gym shorts on, your sweatpants, whatever, your shirt, and you go and you try to run a marathon. How far do you think you're going to get? About a minute. That's a hard minute, right? I've got, And then what do you do afterwards? You're going to stop and you're going to give up and say, I must not be a what? I must not be a runner. I'm certainly not a marathon runner, right? But this is what we do when it comes to becoming more like Jesus, right? This is what we do. We hear stuff, and we think, oh, okay, well, I just got to try to do this. Well, I try not to worry, or I try to have this, or I try to, and we just try. And we try for about a moment, and then we stop, and we think, oh, I just can't do it. But how do you get to the point where you can run a marathon? How do you get to a point? You have to train. And when you're training, right, it involves a few different things. When you're training, first of all, you have to come up with a plan. Say plan with me. Plan. You have to have a plan. Runners, what's the plan? Run. It's like Forrest Gump. I just started running and I didn't stop. No, come on. You have to be a little more intentional than that, right? The first week, are you running 26.2? No way. You start off small. That's the plan, right? And you incrementally increase those miles. Maybe week 1 is just 1 mile. Maybe week 2 is 2 miles, and week 3 is 3 miles. But then you maybe take a break for a week just to kind of let the bodies rest. And it's a long time, right? The plan is a long time over a period of time, right? It's just that's the way it is. You have to have a plan in order to train well. But not only do you need a plan, right? Part of that plan includes practicing. When you want to get better at something, you have to. You have to practice. Now, Jesus was so interesting when he gave the Sermon on the Mount. You guys ever heard the Sermon on the Mount? Right, Matthew 5, 6, 7. Like he gave this most influential sermon, the best sermon ever out there, kind of thing. And he was just blowing people's minds on here's what to do and not do. Here's the kingdom's values and all these things. They were just like, wow. But then he said something so interesting at the very end. And I love how the English and translators translate this word. Here's what he says. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And I love this word practice. I appreciate they translated this practice. Because on one hand, practice is about doing. Practice means there's action, right? We just can't just hear these words, Jesus would say, and just think it's all going to work out. You have to do something with what I just told you to do. You have to put into practice. But what I also love about practice is that it kind of takes the pressure off. Right? Because when you practice something, are you going to get it the first time? Or the second time? Or the third time? No, but that's okay because you're not trying, you're training. And this is a practice. And we're practicing. It's like playing the piano. You can't expect me to come up here and start playing Mozart on the piano the first time around. I have to practice. I have to practice certain skills and drills, and over time, I will get more closely to what it sounds like Mozart, right? And the same is true with following Jesus and becoming more like Jesus. It's not enough just to read about Jesus. It's not enough I can just hand you a book and say, hey, read this information. It'll change your life. No, you have to start putting into practice. Let me just give you an example. How many of you are too busy? This side of the room, apparently. Okay, this side of the room is busy. This side of the room is not busy, right? How do you become less busy? You just try not to be busy? No. Well, how do you become a person of peace? How do you become, as Edwin Friedman would coin the word like 1985, the non-anxious presence? How do you become someone who has so calm in the midst of storms? How do you have that strength, that calmness? How do you become a person of joy? Is it just by trying to stay calm, carry on? Is it just trying to be joyful and smiling more? No. All those things require what we call spiritual practices, spiritual disciplines. We have to do what Jesus did in order to have the kind of life that Jesus had. So if you really want to become less busy, for example, there's spiritual practices that you can put in your life. For example, Sabbathing is a great example of slowing down. I've hadn't had a good Sabbath in like 3 weeks, and so yesterday was beautiful. I got to hang out with my kids. We go on multiple walks, and I just kind of had a nap, and it was lovely. Okay? And that brings a more calmness to me. That brings more joy in my life because I'm more present and I can be more thankful and all those kind of things. It's not by trying harder. It's by practicing the spiritual disciplines, the spiritual practices that Jesus did and he lived out. You guys see that? Okay, it's not about trying. Okay? So information is great, but we got to put things into practice. One of the things I heard from a speaker kind of said, listen, most churches function like a university, where everyone comes in and they find their seat, and the teacher, gives out the information, and there you go. Now go and do whatever with that. He says, I wish more churches acted not like a university, but a dojo. You guys know a dojo? Anybody take karate, kung fu? I'm not even gonna try it up here, but I took karate for like a hot 2 weeks, back when I was in 6th grade. But what's the difference between a university and a dojo? Like you're on the mat and you got somebody to work with and you have these drills and you have these skills and you're doing these things over and over together, right? He says, I just wish churches would function like that. I'm like, yeah, that'd be kind of nice, wouldn't it? If we could actually practice these things together more than just come in here on a Sunday on an hour and just have a university. Here's the information. Now go do what you want with it. No, let's put these things into practice. We can do this together. Okay. So a plan is important when it comes to training. Practicing becomes incredibly important when it comes to training. And the other thing about training is this word right here, perseverance. Perseverance. Training means I'm not going to give up until when? Till it's done, like till I hit my goal, until I run the race, until I do the thing that I set out to do. I'm gonna keep doing. And this is the big difference between trying and training. Trying is so half-hearted. I tell my kids, here, try this. You know what they do? Kind of thing. I'm like, you didn't even try it. I was like, come on, you have to no. That's trying. Training is I am committed. I'm committed. I'm going to invest in this. When you're running, some of you runners, what do you do when you're set out to run a marathon? You invest in what? Shoes? Some really good kicks that can run mile after mile? You get those really cool short shorts that I'm always afraid to wear. I'm like, that's short shorts. But you guys get those running shorts so that you're unhindered. You get that shirt. That's that non-chafe shirt, the kind of thing, so you're not chafing your arms and everything. Like you're running. You got even that fanny pack going on, right? You got that cool fanny pack. I don't know what you put in there, but you put stuff in there apparently. You get the water bottles. You're invested. You got the gear. You invest in the time. Maybe you invest in a gym membership. I don't know what you all invest in, but you're committed. Because I've never done it, but you're committed. You do this thing. You're in it to win it. And you persevere. You're not trying, you're training. And I think this really comes down to, a lot of this comes down to your identity. Are you someone who's just trying to run a race? Or are you a runner training to run a marathon? Are you just trying to become more like Jesus? Or are you a child of God, a disciple of Jesus, training to become more like him? It's a big difference. Just like parenting. We don't want our kids trying to be our children. They already are our children. But we want to train them up to help them see the full potential of what it means to be our child. And Jesus, and God, I think God would say the same thing. I see you for who you really are. You don't have to try, but you need to train. I want to be there with you, but are you trying or training in this? So it's just like parenting. It's just like, it's not about trying. It's about training. So you need one other thing. A plan, you have to practice perseverance. But here's the real thing. If you're really serious about training, and if you have the means for it, what do you get? What do you get if you're really serious about training? A personal what? Trainer. Anybody ever have a personal trainer? Do you love them? Do you hate them? The answer is yes. Right? A personal trainer. What does a personal trainer do? Says, come on, you can do this. A personal trainer says, listen, I know you have a plan. Here's my plan, right? I know that you have intentionality. Let's just take this intentionality step, let's notch it up. Like, I got this. Like, I've been around the block a little bit more. I've done a little bit more. I can see around the corner. I know what I'm doing a little bit more than you, and I want to help you get there. And so they push you, and they challenge you, and they call you up, and they call you out, and you're exposed, right? If you ever had a personal trainer, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. It's tough. And they're hard sometimes on you because they see the potential, and they said, no, let's set a goal, and let's meet it. And they're there to walk with you every step of the way. Now, are you responsible, or are they responsible for your training? You are, right? You are ultimately responsible for your training, but the personal trainer comes in and says, I want to walk with you and help you. Now, the reason I bring a personal trainer up is because this is really what, in some ways, what disciple making is all about. And what a disciple maker kind of really is in so many ways. Right? We looked at it from a disciple perspective, but from a disciple maker's perspective, this is what kind of Jesus did with his disciples. He walked with them to help train them, to show them, here's the plan, here's the tools, here's how you do it, here's what you don't do, and he encouraged them all along the way. Let me just read to you one verse that Jesus just shows his intentionality as a disciple maker, as a personal trainer, as someone who's willing to walk alongside these guys. It's found in the very beginning kind of Matthew, where he calls the first disciples. It's one short verse. Let me just read it for you. It says this: come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. That's the old 1984 version. I love it because that's what I grew up on and I memorized. But he says, come and follow me. Come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And let me tell you, this is so intentional. And it's intentional on three different levels. Here's what it is. It's an intentional invitation into intentional formation through a life intentionally lived on mission. This is an intentional invitation because normally a disciple or a wannabe disciple would go up to a rabbi or teacher and say, please, can I follow you? Can I become more like you? Can I be with you in this process? This is not what Jesus did with these unschooled ordinary fishermen. He goes up to them and it brings an intentional invitation to say, I want you to be with me so that you can become like me. I believe in you enough to say, I think you can be like me. That is huge. And it's so important that he gave an intentional invitation. He makes it clear what this relationship's going to be about. In a disciple-maker relationship, this needs to happen. Okay, for those of you who want to be disciple makers someday, this has to happen. This is called the DTR, the define the relationship talk. In dating, you ever had to define the relationship talk in dating? It's awkward. It's kind of like, I don't know how they're going to respond. But this is so important because it's like if you're a personal trainer and you go into a gym, like if I go to a gym and I start helping some guy squat, like, okay, here, just, bend your hips. This guy would be like, who are you and what are you doing? Like, just hang on, buddy. Just hold it on there. I'm like, I don't even know your name, but no, come on. That would be just ridiculous, right? We would have to have a define the relationship talk first. I will be your trainer and you will listen, kind of thing. This is what is so important because oftentimes we get into relationships and we think we may be like, helping somebody out, but we're frustrated because they're not listening, they're not doing, they're not whatever. And it's like, have you ever actually had the talk, the DTR? Did you actually recognize the roles? No. Well, you need to do that. Okay? So, an intentional invitation into intentional formation. And this is huge. Jesus calls these guys as a rabbi, and they knew he was a rabbi, into a rabbi-disciple relationship so that they could become more like him. This is formation. This is something they signed up to do. They said, yes, we want to become like you. In a disciple-making relationship, we're not asking people to become more like Dave or more like Tony or more like anybody else. We're saying we want to become more like Jesus. And if there's any Jesus in me, great. Copy that. That's what Paul said. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. But if there's stuff that's not like Jesus, don't follow me on that one. But this is so important in our world because someone or something is discipling you right now. You are being formed by someone or something. And discipling is actually counter-formation to the world. You think about it that way. We have to fight against the current of the culture. Because we end up drifting away, there's this formation that needs to happen. We need to become more like Jesus. And what Jesus is actually doing is helping. This is kind of philosophical. He's helping you become more of your true selves. More of your true selves, not less. Become everything that God sees you as you already are. And after this, it's not just intentional formation, but it's through a life intentionally lived on mission. See, Jesus was on mission. And he said, guys, I want you to come alongside me. And it wasn't that, hey, after you graduate, then you'll be missionaries. No. As you follow me as part of the formation process, we're going to live on mission. And Jesus came to seek and save the lost. And here's where we're failing. Can I just tell you where we're failing in this whole process of disciple making? We're not seeing the mission part lived out. We're discipling people in our church, and that's great. And we're helping them grow up in their faith, and that's great. But we're losing sight of the mission when we do that, and we only do that. We need to be on mission. Jesus was on mission. And this whole idea of practicing, if we're not actually in the field playing and doing, if we're actually engaged in the war and all we're doing is just the drilling part and all that we're missing something. And Jesus says, I want you to go. And he sends these guys out multiple times, before he actually says, go and make disciples of all nations. He's teaching them. He's modeling a life on mission. He says, I want you to come and follow me with that. And we're going to talk more on mission in just a couple weeks, but this is so important. It was intentional invitation. Go back, intentional invitation into intentional formation through a life intentionally lived on mission. Intentionality, training, plan, practice, perseverance, right? Personal trainer. All these things are so important. So let me just ask you a couple questions as we wrap up. When it comes to following Jesus, where do you need to stop trying and where do you need to start training? Where do you need to stop trying? Because it's not working. It's not just simply a matter of willpower. It's a matter of starting, the idea of I'm actually going to take this training seriously. And I need a plan. And I need to put some practices in my life. And I need this idea of I'm not going to give up because I'm not trying, I'm training. And if I'm lucky, if I'm fortunate, if I can find somebody, I need a personal trainer as well in my life to help me out. Are you taking this thing of Jesus seriously? Do you want to become more like him or not? If the answer is yes, then let's start training that way. Stop trying that way. Here's the last couple questions. Where are you headed? If you think about your direction in your life right now, where are you headed? Have you drifted? Or is your target pretty much set? You know where you're headed. And that's towards Jesus. And who are you headed there with? Because here's what I know about love. Love doesn't walk alone. Love doesn't walk alone. And you might be saying, well, I don't know how to bring somebody along with me. I don't know what disciple making looks, I've never done it. No one's ever done it with me. Listen, for you who are parents, did you know what you were doing when you became a parent? No way, right? But once you made it I'm a parent, I'm going to be a parent. Once you found out, what did you start doing? You started planning, right? You started practicing. You got your stuff ready. You got ready. You got it. You took it seriously. This is what we need to be doing. Okay? We're here to help. We're here. We're here to walk with you, to equip you, to give you the tools, to coach you, to encourage you. Listen, we're here. But listen, love does not walk alone. Why did you want to become a parent in the first place? Answer? I don't know, right? Some of you are like, I don't know. I don't know now. Listen, you were in a loving relationship, and you said, I want more love in it. I want to bring more love into this. I want to bring more people into this. I think it's the same as disciple making. Me and Jesus, we're great. I want to bring more people into this thing. I want them to experience the same kind of love I have. I want to share my love with somebody else. It's better together. This kind of thing. I want more. I have to remind myself sometimes as a parent why I did that. But it's still the same answer. So if you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here, go centervillegrace.org/DM. This is where, if you want to raise your hand and say, I've never been discipled, listen, we would love to try to help with that. Find somebody for you. If you're saying, listen, I see around the corner a little bit more than others, I've been doing this thing for a while, we'd love to pair you up with somebody and give you some tools and coach you, okay? Bottom line, let me just tell you how I see the world. And I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. But this is how I see the world. And it's changed. It's changed. But here's how I see it now. I really believe everyone I bump into, my neighbors, people at the grocery store, people at the bank, everyone is a potential disciple. I really believe that. I really see everybody as a potential disciple. And I want that for them because I know the joy and the peace and everything that has been brought to my life because I know Jesus and I'm walking with Jesus. But here's where maybe it's a little different than most people. I see every disciple as a disciple maker, as a potential disciple maker. That everyone in this room who's a disciple, you have the potential to come alongside somebody else and say, hey, let me walk with you. Let me add a little bit more intentionality. Let me show you some things, share with you some things to become more like Jesus, and we can walk through this together. I really believe everyone in this room has that potential. But potential is only potential until you add some intentionality to it, right? Because as you moms know, growing older happens naturally. But growing up happens only intentionality, okay? You have to be intentional. Maturity requires intentionality. That's how Jesus changed the world. That's how Jesus will continue to change the world. Would you pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you that you knew coming into this whole thing our tendency to drift, our tendency to lose focus, our tendency to get complacent, our tendency to get distracted. Jesus, I'm so appreciative as I look at your life, how laser focused you were on people. Not politics, not finances, not current events. People. People matter to you the most. And you chose to be intentional with your time, intentional with your relationships, intentional with your energy and your words. So God, I just pray, Lord, that as we try to become more like you, not through just trying, but through training, that more of you is evident in our life. That we experience the kind of joy, the kind of peace, the fullness of life that you had. This is where it's at. This is where I have found it to be. Give us the courage to take those steps. Stop trying to start training. Help us to be mindful of who we could bring along with us as we follow you. We love you, Jesus. We pray all this in your precious name.